Thank you very much. Dzień dobry, welcome. Thank you all for coming. This is really nice. I want to thank the organizers and all the staff who've been so amazing to me here. This is my first trip to Poland. I feel really great about it. Everything's been so warm and welcoming, and I hope you're all ready for some more fun today. I am Joe, as he said, and I am a designer. I live in New York City, and I work for a very, very small company, just me and two developers, called Bombing Brain Interactive. We started this company, they started it about 7 or 8 years ago, and I've been working for them shortly after that as their designer. Our most successful app is called Teleprompt Plus. Turns your iPad into a teleprompter. We also have a Mac version as well. We concentrate mostly on in the iOS world. And we also have an app called Set Lists, which is for singers who can't remember their lyrics. We're working on a new version of that one right now. As I said before, I'm a designer, and I really feel strongly that if you're going to work on a team, you really ought to understand what everyone on the team does and be able to speak their language, so to speak, to understand what you're asking for. If I'm a designer and I need them to do something, I want to know exactly how hard it is to make that custom control or that special thing. And so in that spirit, since I work with two developers, I wanted to learn a little bit about code. And so I made a couple of apps of my own. I went in, learned Objective-C, and built two very simple apps of my own just so that I could become better at communicating with my team. The first one is called X to Y, and it is an aspect ratio calculator. So I use it all the time. You can, for layout and other things like that, if you need to see exactly how much, or resizing rectangles is a big part of what we do. So I use that app quite often. And I enjoy doing that so much that I made another app called Fin. And this one is a timer. I do these kinds of talks quite often. And so when I'm on stage, I like to practice and make sure I can see my timer over here right now. But when I'm practicing, I have a nice timer for myself to make sure that I'm staying within my limits. So if I go over today, you can tell that I didn't do very well with my own app. So that was to learn how to talk better with my team. I learned how to code. I also am very, very interested in business because we are an independent company. There's only 3 of us. And when you're on a small team like that, we kind of all have to do double duty, right? I can't just be a designer. I've got to start working on the marketing, and I've got to help with sales, and I've got to help with all these other aspects of the business. And so to get better at the business side of things, I decided to start a podcast with a friend of mine called Charles Perry. It's called Release Notes. And we talk about business every week. What's it like to try to sell software to people as a very, very small independent company? And we've been doing that every week now for almost 2 years. And it's been a lot of fun and very rewarding. So we as designers, I think a lot of us like to kind of see ourselves as artists, as people who have a particular skill for creating beautiful things and bringing that beauty to the rest of the world. And so we have this sort of lofty image of ourselves as these grand painters of beautiful things. But of course, when we say painter, what the rest of the world really thinks of us is this. Pick a pretty color and just put it on there, right? I don't know how many times I've been told, like, can you just make this pretty? We made this great app, can you just make it prettier? And I don't really think either one of these descriptions describes the job of design completely. Yes, there is some artistic side to what we do, but we're more than just painters, right? We're problem solvers. We ask questions, and then we find solutions to those questions. And the asking questions part is actually more important than the solutions that we come up with. It's a matter of asking the right questions. And then working really hard to find those solutions. And so I don't really think of us as painters so much as architects, right? We are working along with the engineers, with the programmers, to make the decisions, not just, we're not just going to paint the ceiling, we're going to decide what the ceiling's made of. How big is the ceiling? How is the ceiling lit? Okay, we have to make these sorts of decisions all the time in our jobs. And so we have to start looking at ourselves as more of a collaborator with our engineers, and with the rest of our teams as well. And so if we're going to start asking the right questions, I think one of the most fundamental questions we can ask as designers is, who are we designing for, right? For whom do we build these great things? What are we doing all of this work for? Now, unless you're building an app that is meant to be used by other designers, you shouldn't be designing for other designers. Right? We're not here to impress each other. We're not here to try to one-up each other or to show off. Right? The people who use our products are the ones that we're designing for. And they're everyday people. They're just using their phones, their tablets, whatever devices that they have to get things done, whether it be work, whether they're learning at school, whether they're just communicating with each other. These apps were built for them. We need to work for them. And these folks don't really care about fonts. They don't care about color palettes. They don't care about all those things that we have to sweat those details. So it's very, very important for us to remember that this is the end goal here, to make these people happy, to either make their lives easier, to help them make money, save money, be entertained, whatever it is that our app is supposed to do. We have to keep them in mind throughout the entire process. And once you start doing that and you're working on a team, you realize then that you are a part of an overall team. It's very common for us to kind of get siloed, right? We think about, those engineers are making me do this and that, and the marketing people are always making me, I can't do my job properly. And we work against each other instead of working with each other. We should see ourselves as part, one little gear in the overall machine that is working towards helping these people who are using our products. We all know what happens when we let an engineer control the situation. If we let our programmers make the entire app, the app tends to be a little, crazy. It's got every control possible. It's a little ugly, maybe, and nobody knows how to use it, right? We know what happens when we let the salespeople run the company. We get early versions of Microsoft, not today, but if you think about Windows 95, Windows 98, these were apps that were built for IT professionals because those were the ones buying, right? The salespeople had to sell to an IT guy in a company, not to the person who's actually using it. And so we as designers often fantasize, what would happen if, wouldn't it be great if just all this software were just run, and all these companies were run and headed up and 100% influenced by design. Well, I don't know if that would be all that great either. I think we need those engineers. I think we need our marketing people. I think we need our salespeople because they do an important job. If it's just up to designers, people think that Apple is all about, it's led by design. I think there's a lot more than design going on in Apple. And so if we let us run the show, we might end up with really, really beautiful boxes that have nothing inside. We might end up with perfect formed hinges and beautiful materials, but then what does the thing do? I mean, unless this was meant to be bought as a box, right? So I think about sites like Dribbble, and I like Dribbble, don't get me wrong. I think it's great that it's there, that we have this community, but it's very, very important when you're using something like Dribbble to not get caught up in the idea of this notion that we're only talking to each other, right? This is a gated community, only other designers. You have to be invited to get in here. And only other designers can talk to each other in here. And it's great if you use that for that sort of feedback. If you post something and you say, hey, I would really love some people's opinions. But you can't do it just in hopes that you're going to get some other designer to say, wow, that's really awesome. Right? You kind of want real constructive criticism, and this platform doesn't necessarily lend itself to that. I've seen it used that way, but it's often used more as a, hey, look what I can do, rather than a kind of a resource for real true back and forth. And also, you're only talking to other designers, and so if you're in here all the time, you're forgetting who you're actually working for. When I was learning how to code, I spent a lot of time on sites like Stack Overflow and GitHub and other places, and I found these, they're not perfect, but they were amazingly collaborative places. I could ask a simple question like, hey, how do you solve this problem? And people would just jump in and answer it. And so there's sort of this spirit of generosity amongst developers, and I'm sure some developers would disagree with me on this. Maybe they have a different perspective, but when I was just peeking in there, it sure looked to me like these folks were much more collaborative and in the open, in the public. There was a great presentation yesterday, I don't know how many of you saw it, about open design, and I thought that was an amazing direction to be heading in, that we should be sharing our source files, that we should be talking to each other. There are some great designers out there. One of my favorites is Mark Edwards, who he posts all the time on his blog. This is how I do this in Photoshop. He actually shows you the actual steps, and this is how I use layer styles. And I thought, that's really neat. I wish there was more of that collaboration going on, and hopefully we're moving in that direction. But this is, to me, is designers working with each other to reach the same end goal. And I really like that. So I'm hoping to see more of that in the future. OK, so we know who we're working for. The next big question we have to ask is, what does this thing do? Right? Someone hands you a project, we're going to build this app. And you say, OK, what is it? What does it do? And the next logical question that should follow that, once you find out what it does, is to ask yourself the more important question, which is that something we should build? This is a joke. Right? A group of designers decided to sort of poke a little fun at Silicon Valley, and they made this site called Jake Date. This is a website to help this guy, Jake, get a date. Right? It's not a dating site where other people can, that would be something useful, right? This is for Jake, and he's going to get a date. And they built him an app, and it's got all these cool things, all the buzzword features like swiping, and they built this beautiful looking, well-designed website, and it's got the app and all the features in there, and it's got all the buzzwords, all the marketing, the way we market our apps nowadays, one-click checkout. What are we checking out? I don't know. But so he built this whole thing, and it's really, really fun and funny, but it's kind of pointing I think it's really good satire at what's wrong with much of what's going on in the current atmosphere of startups around Silicon Valley in particular. And it's that we're building things that are sort of, we're not asking the question of whether or not things should be built. They even have the pull quote, which I really like, from the CEO of Match.com, with a giant picture. And they're doing all the steps that you're supposed to do to market this beautiful app. They even have their team showing off. I like Mel's title there, the head of Swipe. But the point is that they're making fun of something that I think we ought to be paying more attention to, that many times we're going and making things that are beautiful, and what they're doing is not all that purposeful. People don't buy software, right? They don't download software. They're looking for a solution to a problem. So always try to keep that in mind when you are creating your experiences. And don't be afraid to ask that question. When someone hands you a project, say to yourself, is this something we ought to be building? All right, that's part of your job. Another thing that designers love to do is to look to the past for inspiration. And that's a really good idea, by the way. We see these old, beautiful machines like typewriters, and we say to ourselves, wow, that was really cool. The problem is you have to be careful not to fetishize or not to forget that these old tools were built, they're wonderful for their time, but don't try to convince yourself that this is a better way to type things and a better way to get your thoughts down necessarily than a modern day word processor. Don't forget that this is heavy, that it jams, that it requires a ribbon, that you have to have paper, that if it certainly doesn't have spell check. We can make fun of our spell checkers all we want, but try not having one for a while. It also, if you want to make a correction, just rip the page out and start all over again, or you have to use some sort of correction tape. All right, it's not a perfect device. It doesn't mean we can't learn from it. It doesn't mean that modern day word processors like Microsoft Word are perfect by any means, any stretch of the imagination. But don't fool yourself into thinking that software is somehow not as great as that nostalgic past. I know a lot of authors still write on typewriters, but it's kind of silly if you think about it. You're kind of fetishizing the past in a way that maybe isn't necessarily helpful. And so if we want to improve the Microsoft Word experience, which I think we definitely can, we don't necessarily want to take away the strengths of the computer. We want cut, copy, and paste. We want to be able to move paragraphs around. Let's not take that away. But let's look at that typewriter and say to ourselves, well, what was great about the typewriter that the current computer doesn't have? Well, one thing is we've got all these palettes, and we've got all this ability to change colors and to move things around, and that can be very distracting, right? And so if you take a modern day word processor, what a lot of good designers have been doing with it lately is stripping it down, right? We're still on a computer, which is a lot lighter than my typewriter. But we're just looking at the words, we're just looking at the text, and we're concentrating. We make it a full screen so that we don't have our Twitter feed and our Facebook getting in our way when we're trying to write. And we're not worried about whether it's bold or underlined, we're just writing our thoughts down. Right? This is the right kind of approach. And we can even take it a step further, and you'll see a lot of these distraction-free typing programs, they'll even emphasize just the current line, and they'll kind of fade away the rest of what you're working on. And that's kind of neat, but we don't want to take that too far. What's next? We're going to just focus on the current letter of the word that we're typing? I don't know. Maybe there's a point where trying not to distract yourself goes a little too far. I'll give you an example. This is not a joke. This app, if you think about an app like Instagram, really, really amazing. They took what was great about a cell phone camera and emphasized that, right? The fact that it was always with you and that you could share your photos around really quickly. And then they took what wasn't so great about a cell phone camera, which was the fact that it's a lower resolution, you don't have the ability to change lenses, the average person isn't exactly a great photographer, and they kind of worked with those weaknesses by giving us things like filters and being able to be creative and play around that old 70s. That's nostalgia in a good way, right? It's whimsical, it's fun, and we upload our photos and everybody's happy. This app takes that about 15,000 steps further, and they really thought about the old camera, the old Instamatic camera, and they thought, well, what if we don't let people see the pictures they took? So not only can I not share the photos that I take with this app immediately, not only can I not edit them or crop them or resize them or add filters, I can't even see them. I take the picture and it's gone. I take 24 pictures and then I send it to them and they mail me printouts of my photos. Is that taking this concept a little too far, right? We've taken away the one thing that's great about a cell phone camera, right? Which is that we can see our pictures instantly and we can share them with friends. I don't know if this is maybe a little overboard. Who knows? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe 2 years from now, this will be bigger than Instagram. I kind of have a hard time believing that. So I want to show you some other examples of what I think is what I'm trying to demonstrate here. Some really, really good things that are designed, I think, in ways that really talk and speak to what the user needs. And I'm going to show some negative examples as well, some things that I think maybe aren't necessarily on the right track. I'm not judging, and I'm certainly not making fun of anyone. And I'm not saying that I haven't made much bigger mistakes than anything I'm going to show you here, so please don't view it that way. If you see some of the things I have shipped, believe me, I'm as embarrassed as anyone. So. And I think for my negative examples, I tried my best to pick on really big companies that can take my criticism. So the first one is an example of what tends to happen out there, which is designing for a demonstration. In other words, we're making a mock-up instead of designing a real product. Great example of this is this recent Apple Watch. It's beautiful. I cannot wait to get my Apple Watch. Everything about this thing looks amazing. But a lot of people have been making fun of this particular screen on the Apple Watch. This is really, really great. This is how you see your contacts, right? So if you need to send a message to one of your friends, you get this nice view with these beautiful circles. And this is awesome if all your friends have 4-letter names. And if you happen to have a picture for every one of your friends. How many of you have contacts in your contacts in your phone right now that you don't have a picture for, right? Can you recognize every one of your friends by their picture and first name only? I probably can't, right? So I took the liberty here of mocking up what this would look like using some of the names of some of the other speakers here. And it kind of falls apart really fast, right? And imagine if we didn't have the pictures to go along with it. Obviously Apple's going to solve this problem. They know that. But this is the sort of thing where you can make something look really, really pretty if you don't have to use real data. You have to be really, really wary of lorem ipsum text. Right? This is a wonderful savior when you're out there and you're trying to do a big layout for a website and you don't have the block of text from the marketing department yet, and they tell you, well, just fill something in and we'll write it later. And I always try to say to them, well, you're supposed to design around the content, not the other way around. But okay, sometimes you have no choice, right? But be careful how much you use this stuff, because it's really easy to make something look beautiful when you don't have to use real data. And that's a very common problem that we have. So if you have the ability to actually grab real data out of your own phone or out of someone else's phone to mock up your pictures and make sure that it actually looks good, what happens when the person doesn't have a photo? What happens when I don't have a description, or when this description is really long or really short? Try to use real data whenever possible. Another big thing I see happening a lot is this concept of trying to impress. Right? And this is coming from that idea that we're building things hoping that other designers are going to think, wow, that was a really cool design. And so we see things that are really kind of interesting and flashy, and they're trying to grab our attention, but why are they there? This is PayPal's website, and I'm still trying to figure out why this video is on their homepage. I guess she's buying something with her phone. I guess that's the idea, but was that worth me downloading a big video just to kind of get the, I know what PayPal does, all right? Maybe this is for the people who don't know what PayPal does, but even if you didn't know what PayPal was, would you know what it is after watching this video? All right, so we're seeing lots of this. We're seeing these giant photos on web pages, and they're beautiful. We're seeing videos now on lots of web pages, and they're maybe beautiful, but I don't know what the purpose is necessarily. When I go to PayPal, what I want to do is log in, right? And the login is all the way up on the top here. It's above this video. It's cropped out right now. But I don't want to have to download this video every time I want to log in. Another common thing I see happening a lot, Apple likes to throw around this term, surprise and delight. You can't have one and not the other. You can't surprise your users and then annoy them, right, with that surprise. And I'm going to go to my friend Apple here to demonstrate this. This is the Mac Pro website. It is gorgeous. The jankiness of this video is coming from my keynote. It's really smooth when you're actually watching it. Look at these amazing animations. Look at the infographics, beautifully designed. Right? This site is absolutely amazing until you realize that how I'm going from one section to the next on this, I'm scrolling. Right? So I have to scroll, wait for the animation to finish, scroll again, wait for the animation to finish, scroll again. Right? If these were a series of buttons along that right side that I would just press to go to the next piece, no problem. Right? We expect you press a button and then something happens. When I'm scrolling, I expect that to be a continuous motion, and I expect to be able to go back when I want to go back to the section before. This hijacks that whole concept and doesn't allow me to do that. They were so impressed with their ability to do these wonderful, cool graphics on a website that they forgot the basic concept of scrolling, right? And we're seeing a lot of this on websites where people are hijacking, taking over controls that we are used to that do a certain thing that users are absolutely expecting and doing the exact opposite. And if you do that in a way that's annoying, the fact that this site is beautiful goes away and they don't care. They're just annoyed and they move on to something else. You have to be really, really careful. There's another example of this hijacked scrolling. This is from the New York Times. And you can see as I'm scrolling on this page, sometimes the text moves just in little blocks. Sometimes it becomes just a regular article. And sometimes it stops like this and we see a little video with just a little tiny little block of text. I don't know what this story is about. I sat on this website for a half hour just playing with the scrolling. It was fun. I never read the story. If I'm the New York Times, what's the most important thing to me? That you read my story, right? I haven't read it yet because I was having too much fun playing with the scrolling. Okay, we're distracting. Do I really need these videos and these enhanced images and all this other stuff just to get across a good story? What are they saying to me? Are they saying their writers stink and this is boring? Are they saying that I'm stupid and I need to be entertained? What are they trying to tell me with this? I worry about these sorts of attempts to impress instead of actually serving the need of the user. Now, lest you think I think all scrolling is bad, all creative scrolling is bad, this is actually an example of what I think is a really creative and cool way to take over scrolling on a website. This is a custom site made by a couple who are getting married. She's a designer and he's the engineer. She designed it, he built it. And this is just a cute little story about how they met and they're announcing to their friends that they're getting married. Okay. Notice though, as I scroll, you can actually see my scroll bar over on the right, which is a nice start. And I can actually scroll smoothly. I can stop at any time that I want. I can go backwards if I want, and it behaves the way pretty much I would expect scrolling to behave. That little balloon just keeps moving downward or upward based on my scroll. The message here, the point of this website is to be a little whimsical and have fun. There's not a lot of text. There's only a couple little introductory pieces about how they met, and it's combined with some illustrations. And it's fun, it's whimsical, and it's not supposed to be a serious story about whatever that other story was about. And so this is a great example of surprising your user and also delighting them. I thought this was pretty cool. Other times when we're designing, we can see examples of really good things out there, things that were designed very well, but then we ask ourselves, well, who are they, who did they do that great design for? For example, this is the new Google login, and this is right when they came up with the new concept of Google+, right? They were going to start their own social network called Google+. And so what they decided was, which is pretty cool, is they're going to take all of those logins you had. You had a Gmail, or you have Maps, and then you have YouTube, and all these other things, and we're just going to combine all those into one login, and we're going to make that login a login for Google+, right? It's convenient, it's easy, simplifies things. Also happens to really, really help Google boost their numbers on Google Plus membership. And what if I don't have Gmail? What if I don't use Maps? And what if I only wanted to use YouTube? Well, I can't have a YouTube login anymore. I have to have a Google Plus login. All right, so is that ideal for me to have like be a member of this social network I don't want to be a member of just in order to use YouTube? I don't know, all right? But this is well designed. It's just designed to help Google's needs as much as it is to help us. Another example of this is independent developers like myself, app developers. We depend very, very strongly on ratings on the app stores. Whether you're in the Android Play Store or you're in the iOS store, how other people rate your apps is really, really important, obviously. And so we know human nature. Usually, people who hate your app will be 10 times more likely to rate it than people who like your app. People who like your app just use it, right? The ones who hate it have to tell you about it. And have to tell the world about it. And so we end up with way more negative ratings than we do positive ratings. How do we help fix that? Well, a lot of us are building in these little dialog boxes in our app. So as you're playing with it for a few days, it'll pop up and say, hey, it looks like you're using the app, looks like you're having fun with it. Do you mind throwing us a rating? And at first, these would just be standard alert boxes that would come up. They were kind of ugly and janky. But now, people are designing really nice, pretty ones, and that's great. And by the way, this works. Right? Most of the time, when you put these in your app, you will get more positive ratings. But don't kid yourself into thinking you're doing this for your users. Does this help the user in any shape or form, any way? No, this is helping you. And sometimes that's important. Sometimes you have to stay in business, okay? I'm not saying don't do this, but don't kid yourself into thinking that this is good design for the sake of the user, because this doesn't help the user at all. It just interrupts them. So be careful to, when you're doing a design, to keep in mind who you're targeting. And of course, don't ever do it this way. This is the classic push notification with a begging to rate. Right? So I wasn't even using the app. I'm just walking around on the phone. I feel the vibration in my pocket. And I'm thinking it's a message from somebody who's important. I pop it open, and it's like, hey, you love our app, give it 5 stars. That's terrible. Hopefully none of us are doing that. But I see it happen every once in a while. Again, that's really not thinking of your user at all. Okay, so enough negativity. I'm going to show you some things that I actually think are really, really cool and really well done, and that you may not notice, the kinds of things that you're not noticing that the designer really, really spent a lot of time thinking about. And the first category of these is understanding what's difficult about your app. This is an app called Quotebook. It's made by a couple of friends of mine, actually, in New York. And it's just for storing your favorite quotes. You get a favorite passage from a book or a website or some famous old quote from an author that you really like. You can just save them all in one place. And that's really cool and really neat. But the difficulty with an app like this is that you have to work. Right? When you open it up, there are no quotes. You have to go find the quotes. You have to bring them in. You have to write in who the author was, where it came from. You have to link to it and all of those things. So what the creators of this app figured out was, well, how do we make that a little easier? Now, you see this quote by Walter Isaacson that's in my book, in my quote book. I'm going to show you how I got that quote into the book. All I did was I went to the ebook, the iBooks app, where I had the book. I copied some text. I just grabbed it and copied it. And when I flipped back into their quote book app, a little dialog pops up that just says, hey, I see you've got text on your clipboard. I see that it's from this Walter Isaacson book. I see that it's about Steve Jobs. Do you want me to add it? And you just say yes, and all of that information is automatically added. I didn't have to look up the author. They actually go through and parse your text against the database of all of these quotes to automatically figure out where that quote is from, and it adds all that for you. They take away some of the pain of adding content to this. That's really clever. It's not something that's beautiful. It's not something you're necessarily going to be able to see in a screenshot, but the first time you use that, it's so amazing. I think, oh, wow, that's really cool. It just popped in there for me. So these are the kinds of things. This is another example of an app on the Mac called Deliveries that, again, does this job really well. It's for tracking your packages for different delivery systems. And all you need is the tracking number. If you pop the tracking number into this app, it automatically figures out whether it's DHL or whether it's FedEx or your local postal service. And it does this neat little map to show you where it currently is, where your package happens to be sitting right now. Very, very easy. Again, they did a hard job there. They could have just as easily said, put in your tracking number, then put in where it's from, and put in the date, and and have to type in all these different fields. But instead, they reduced it down to one field. You add that in, and it instantly pops in here. This also syncs instantly with your phone, with your tablets, and with everything else. So very, very cool. So understanding that inputting data is one of the hardest things to do on mobile, and taking away the extra steps. This is an app that I really love. It's called Omni Outliner. And I don't know about you, but like when I like to write outlines, I love doing it in this app because I like to outline my information. When I'm doing a talk like this, the first thing I do is I just go into an app like this and I just start typing. When you're making outlines, the most common thing you're doing is adding a new line, right? That's either directly beneath it, or you're indenting, right, to do a sub-concept, or you're reverse indenting to pop back out at the end of a concept. And so normally how you would do this with the app, and you can do it this way, you would press this little plus button here, right, to add a new line. And then you could use these two little buttons over here to go up and down, back in and out of indenting, right? It's a couple steps. So I'm typing my thoughts away, and I get to the end of the thought, and now I have to bring it down, and then I have to decide whether to go left or right with it, right? You could do that, and it works perfectly well for people who don't discover the next little trick. What they did was they added this tiny little widget that when you press, you see what happened here? When I press this plus button, these little extra buttons pop up. And that allows me to not just create a new line, but create a new line that's directly underneath, or a line that's indented one, or a line that's outdented one. And if I just tap and hold, that little widget comes up, and then I slide my finger to the right place, and it creates the new line in that correct position. Sounds like a little thing, right? But when you're typing furiously and your thoughts are going crazy, yeah, it's amazing once you discover that, how much easier it is to get an outline done. And the more I do this, every time I do that little thing with a line when I'm typing in an outliner, I love this app that much more. It makes me think, wow, I'm glad they thought of me when they were making this. They didn't just put a button in there. They really thought about how people use it. Again, not something that's going to win a design award, not something that's going to show up in a screenshot, but something that actually helps a real person. It's another one of my favorite apps. It's called Fantastical on the iPad. And what it does, it lets you just type out a sentence, and it will create your appointments for you. One of the things that stinks about making appointments is you have to go through the date picker, and you got to go pick what day it is and what time it is, which calendar you want, and then you want to invite somebody, you got to go through your database. So here I can just type, 10 a.m. meet with Jess tomorrow, and it knows to make that appointment tomorrow, and it knows to add that person to my invitation. And notice also what they've done here, which is really clever, is they're animating as I'm typing. So as I'm typing these words, I say tomorrow, and it immediately creates an event for the next day. And I say 10 a.m. to 11 a.m., and it automatically creates that time slot for me. I can see whether it's understanding me immediately. Google Now gets this really well. As you dictate to it, you talk to it, it immediately translates. Whereas Siri on the Apple platform, you have to just press hold and talk to her for a while and hope she understands you, right? And then you wait a few seconds, and then pop, the whole sentence comes up, and then you find out whether one or two words were wrong. There's something about that instant feedback, and the fact that they're animating that in for me so that I know that this is working. Really clever, really hard work. Again, maybe not something you notice the first 15,000 times you use it, but I stopped myself, and as I was typing this, I thought, that's really cool that it's actually animating as I go. Pretty neat. Speaking of animations, animations are really huge right now in the design world. We are moving away from the old ornamentation, right? We're taking out textures, we're taking out shadows, we're taking out extra ornamentation in our apps, and we're doing what a lot of people are referring to as flat design, okay? Either Android material design, Apple's new iOS 7 look and feel. Of course, this all started with Windows Phone back in the day with Metro, was really where this trend started. And so what we're doing as we take out ornamentation, we as designers are afraid now that our apps are too boring or too plain, and we're adding animation in to compensate. And sometimes that animation is really good, it's really helpful, it's actually showing me what the app is doing. Other times it's just animation for the sake of animation. So we always have to ask ourselves, yes, I can do this cool spinny move, but does that actually add anything to my app? So I wanted to show you some examples of animations I think work really well. This is a podcast app called Castro. And you'll see I'm in the settings screen here. And when I want to come back to the main screen from the settings, I can press that little done button down on the bottom here to just finish, and close the settings. But I can also, as I'm scrolling, right, you'll notice at the top there, you can see the little panel wants to come back down. And if I keep pulling and pulling, it pops back into place. And it's sort of one of those things where the first time I did that, I thought, oh, that's really neat. I wonder if that's going to pop, and it did. All right, so they took the time. They understood that a user scrolling this panel was going to want that to close, and they did it. That probably took quite a bit of programming to get to work really smoothly, but it looks and works really well. Here's another app I really like called Lush. I'm a bit of an amateur mixologist at home. I moved to New York, where it's very expensive to drink. So I like to mix drinks at home instead, because it's a lot cheaper to buy a bottle than it is to go out and have one drink. So this app not only has all the recipes for all these great classic drinks, but they did some cool, clever animations in here. And what I wanted to show you is not necessarily how cool it is that the physics of those glasses, kind of the liquid inside shakes, and it shakes more if you push harder. That's neat, but probably not necessary. What's kind of neat about this is, as it's sliding in here, you'll notice that the ingredients are actually in the correct ratios of these. And you can see they're color-coded down underneath when this pops back up. So you can see milk, coffee liqueur, and vodka is in there. And I can see that, oh, okay, it's equal parts, or it's, oh, 2/3 of this. You can see that all the way on the left side there, the martini barely has a tiny little line of vermouth there, and then the rest of it is all vodka. So they're showing me visually really quickly what are the ratios of different ingredients in here. And that took a lot of programming. That means every one of these drinks has to have a custom drawn view, which is really, really neat. And this is a classic animation from OS 10. This one actually goes all the way back to 2000, before that. Yeah, around 2000, 2001, when OS 10 first came out. A lot of people made fun of this. They said this is classic Apple being Apple. You know, why do this weird, like, genie-style window sliding down when you minimize? At the time, Windows, you would just press the minimize button, it would just disappear. But if you ever watch someone who's never used a Mac before, and they accidentally hit that minimize button, and you watch their eyes go down to the dock, right? You can see their eyes follow the window down there. And so they go, oh, that's where it went. And they go and they get it back, all right? There's something about watching that. Yes, it's really neat. Yes, it's really beautiful, but it also serves a purpose. It's teaching me spatially, where did that window go? How can I go find it again? So those are the kinds of animations we want to be looking to. So when you're building an animation in an app, you want to ask yourself, does this add anything, or is this just me showing off? And just because you can show off doesn't necessarily mean you should. Okay, so why does all this matter? Why am I drilling all this stuff, and why am I talking about all these things? Ultimately, we are part of a team that's building a product, and that product needs to succeed. That's our job. We're not here to impress other designers or impress each other. We're here to get people to use our apps and enjoy using our apps. And what happens when people enjoy using your app is they tell their friends. They're chatting about it. Hey, what are you using lately? Oh, I'm using Instagram, or I'm using this new app. That's how apps succeed over time. No matter how much sales and marketing we pour into our app, no matter how much press we get when our apps first launch, ultimately, if the app is going to succeed long term, we need users who actually like using it and recommend the app to their friends. This is a very common sales chart for apps. And a lot of people assume that this is the default, that this mobile software works this way, that you launch it, you get all this press, and all these people go and buy it, and then 2 months later, no one's talking about your app, it's dead. So you have to make all your money right up front, and then after that, it's forget it. Okay? They think this is the default. They think this is just the way it works on mobile. But there's a very obvious reason why this happens. Okay? And it's because we build apps that are impressive and fun and kind of cool and whimsical, but then in through 3 days, we move on to the next impressive, fun, cool, whimsical thing. We're building temporary distractions, we're not building tools. Right? And so if you build an app that's only meant to be used once or twice and then thrown out, well, of course it's not going to get bought 3 months or 4 months or 5 months from now, because it's no longer on my phone at this point. I'm not telling my friends about it. When you build a true premium experience, you build an app that I keep using, that I'm still using a year or 2 years or 3 years from now. That's an app that I grow to love over time. I get an emotional connection to it. This, to me, is that Omni Outliner app, right? I'm using it more now than I was when I bought it 2 years ago. And I tell my friends, I'm telling you about it, right? So clearly, this is an app that's been on the store for several years and is doing very well. It's not an app that made all of its money in its first 6 months. What was the app? This app is called Omni Outliner. So the point is, if we build experiences and we build apps that are going to be continued to use, that actually solve problems for our users, we've got a much better chance of that app still being around in 2 or 3 years, which means we got a much better chance of still having a job in 2 or 3 years. right? This is the kind of sales chart you should be aiming for, and people think this is not possible in the mobile world, but it absolutely is. There are apps that are doing better now than they were doing 4 years ago, right? This should be the goal. So we need to concentrate on that. And I think the way to get there is to not be designing for other designers, to not be thinking, oh, my friends are going to think this is so cool, or I'm going to put this on Dribble, and oh man, they're going to love this, man. I'm going to be like the coolest guy here, and everyone's going to do a rebound on me, right? No one who really matters cares about any of that stuff. They just want an experience. They just want an app that they love to use. And so think of those people when you're building your apps, and I think you'll be better off in the long run. So thank you. And I believe now we have some time for just a couple of questions. And if anyone has anything, you can feel free to. There are some microphones. They'll bring one to you if you want to raise your hand, or can't see anyone here. These lights make it very difficult to see.
Hey, first, thank you for the presentation. I'm here.
Oh, there you are.
I have a question about emotion and devolving the user using emotions to, let's say, make a stronger commitment to your app. Mm-hmm. You show or you presented the cases when users were forced to rate the app. Mm-hmm. But what are your thoughts about using emotions and then try to persuade them to use the rating systems? Okay, so the idea is, get them to love your app first, and then get them to rate the app. That's fine, and like I said, as a small business person myself, I understand the need for those ratings, and I understand that at some point, if you're out of business, you can't help your customers, right? And so encouraging them in some way is something you're going to have to do. My only hesitation there is just always remember that one is for you, not for them, right? And you can get away with that a little bit here and there. Try to make it as inconspicuous and as little of a distraction as possible. Don't pop it up in their face as they're trying to do something. Wait until, and that's the problem with mobile apps though, right? Because there aren't a lot of times in the app where I'm just staring at it. Usually I'm in the app, I want to do something, and then I want to get out. And if you're holding me up from getting out of the app, you might lose that goodwill that you had with them if you annoy them. So you have to be really careful. A lot of, on the iOS side, a lot of developers lately have been just in their updates sections rather than in the app itself. When it gets into your list of updates, which I know not everyone sees, but they just put a thing, hey, it would be really great if you could help us out. And that's not distracting me in any way. Putting a link inside your settings, say, hey, if you really like the app, where it's off to the side, where someone went into that settings panel on purpose, those kinds of things are far less obtrusive. And I think, yeah, you should at least do that much, right, to try to get people and encourage them. But other than that, yeah, I just worry that you're going to lose all that goodwill that you had gained, that someone really loves your app, but then ends up hating you if you annoy them too much. So you have to just be really careful with it. I wouldn't say don't do it, I'd just say be careful about it. Questions?
So, hi.
Hi.
Stefan here. How do you convince the necessary stakeholders that your design is actually useful and that it will add functionality? And most of all, most important, how do you convince the developer to put in the time and the effort to actually make that work?
One of the best ways I found to do that is to concentrate on goals, not on emotions when you're talking to your team. In other words, don't say, hey, do you like this? Or, hey, isn't this cool? You want to say, like, what are our goals here? We want the user to do this. Does this help the user get there? Yes. Then why wouldn't we do it? Right? So the developer is always going to come back and say, that's going to take me 2 weeks of work. And I'm going to have to say, well, yeah, but the users will like us that much more, and the app will sell that much better. This meets our goal. Try to take the emotional side out of it when you're talking to your team, because the emotion of your team usually is, I don't want to spend another 3 weeks working on this really difficult thing. Or if you're a salesperson, oh, this isn't flashy enough. A lot of marketing people will say, this isn't flashy enough. And that's how we end up with websites with all kinds of crazy graphics on them, because they're saying, we want this pop. Right? I hate that word pop. Right? You don't want it to pop. You want your users to read your information and get something out of it, and you want them to go buy the app. You don't want them to be wowed. You want them, to go buy. And so you need to steer the conversation in that direction. I'm not saying that's easy. I've failed many times at doing that myself. Luckily with my own little team now, the two guys I work with, live in that world and they understand that. They're very good. They're always willing to do extra work if it's going to serve the app. But I lose arguments with them all the time, and sometimes they're right, and they're saying I'm just being flashy, and I'm saying, oops, yeah, you're right, okay. But yeah, try to keep it based on goals. Like, what are we trying to accomplish here, and does that? Even if you're a consultant and you're talking to a client, the same thing. Are we trying to be flashy, or are we trying to actually solve a specific problem? Any other questions?
Your presentation reminds me the HTML sites and Flash sites from 2005, which was really brilliant looking, but does nothing.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.